Hello and welcome. We are in conversation today with Dr. Soumya Swaminathan, Secretary of Department of Health Research and Director General of Indian Council of Medical Research, a senior scientist who's working to push basic research and science through the institute here. Thank you so much, Dr. Swaminathan, for speaking with CNBC TV 18. First up, we talk a lot about research in India. We talk a lot about what scientists are doing. We have the best quality of scientists available who work globally on all levels of science development. But we don't see a new drug out of an Indian institute in India. Where do you think there is a gap where there is capability, but we are somewhere missing out on the line?
So, thank you for that question. And I think the first thing is that, when most people think about research, they probably think about products. And therefore, it's quite natural to want to see a new drug, a new vaccine, and a new diagnostic. And that's true, that we should aim to do all of those things. But in order to get a new drug, you need a whole chain, what we call as the innovation value chain, right from the time when a scientist actually has an initial discovery in the lab, when they find out some molecular pathway and a drug target. And from there, then, you have to do a lot of work, preclinical work initially, to find out whether that particular drug target, you can find a molecule to work on that. And then once you have a molecule, then you do toxicity studies, you look at to make sure that it would be safe, that it's druggable. And then you take it into animal studies. And then finally, after having done all of that, it comes into human studies, and then it goes through phase 1, look at safety, clinical trials, and then phase 2 and 3. Now, it's been estimated that out of every 1,000 molecules that a scientist discovers and thinks could become a new drug, only one actually makes it past all these barriers. So it's not only a question of financial resources that somebody has to invest. You invest in 1,000, you will get one at the end. But you also need to make sure that the scientist who does the initial discovery is not the person who will be able to take it through the other steps. So you need pharmacologists, you need organic chemists, you need biochemists, and then you need people with expertise in doing animal studies, toxicology studies. You need good animal facilities to do that. And then pharmacokinetics, and then finally you need people with a good clinical trial experience who can do this. So that is where I think we have not been able to create that system where there is a seamless flow and there's synergy and collaboration between these different groups. And ultimately you need a industrial pharma partner, you need a commercial partner, because otherwise this product is never going to find its way into market. So now there are several initiatives by the Government of India, the Department of Biotechnology, the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research, CSIR, and the ICMR have really started working together to see how can we collaborate on academia, public, private, and industry partnerships in order to actually move a product, whether it's a vaccine or whether it's a drug candidate.
So, are we strong enough as far as basic research is concerned? Are we funding enough of basic research in India?
I think we have very strong basic science research organizations, and there's a lot of discoveries being made on a daily basis. So I think if we are able to do this strengthening of the chain along the way, then we'll actually be able to take those basic science discoveries and try and move them through, because otherwise most of them are just getting lost because the scientists who make those initial discoveries are not able to
move it on to the next level. And industry academia collaboration is also not much seen in India. In countries like US and all, it's an ecosystem. It's a thriving ecosystem where drugs are being taken to the market or at least the research is taken forward by private companies as well, and the industry. Do you think there is a lack of policy initiative on that part, or the market dynamics for the industry doesn't support them? Where do you think this gap is?
Yes, I think it's a bit of everything. The first thing is that R&D for new drugs, diagnostics and vaccines is a risky business. and therefore there's a risk in investment. Now, a company, particularly if it's a small to medium-sized company, would not want to take major risks. They would like to use their funds to ensure that they are able to get a product which is marketed and that they get returns, or their shareholders get returns. So if you look at the US, and you mentioned that they've been very successful, the initial risky investment is all by government. So it's the NIH, which has a budget of about $30 billion, which invests in the basic science, and then which allows scientists to spin off companies or to sell their intellectual property to a company that would then, once the company knows that yes, this product has already been brought to a certain stage by scientists, now all they have to do is take it and upscale the whole thing and manufacture it at GMP and then be able to market it.
So as a country, are we not investing enough from the government side on basic research then?
We need to invest more in basic research, but now I think the policy environment has also taken cognizance of these barriers that we have, and so a lot of attempts, a lot of work is being done to ease these barriers. On the regulatory side, for example, we used to take a long time to give approval for a new drug product that wanted to do clinical trial in India, and there were a lot of delays, and our companies did suffer as a result. Now the timelines have been shortened, processes have been streamlined, everything is online, and so the DCGI's office, for example, now has set timelines for each process, and so that if you apply today, within 3 months you're going to get. So that's made a big difference. Where we are still need to strengthen further is in the area of clinical trials. We don't have very good phase 1 trial sites in the country, so most companies are still forced to go outside. Same is true for animal studies as well, and for the phase 1 human trials. The phase 2 and 3 we're able to do quite comfortably, though we need to again build up more sites so that many more trials can be happening simultaneously.
Okay. Any work that is being done from ICMR's side to push on the clinical trials work?
So we are actually in the process of now identifying several medical college institutions. It could be both in the private and the public sector, which have the potential and the capability to become trial sites. The phase 1 trial sites, there may be only 1 or 2 to begin with in the country, because they are require a heavy investment, both in terms of infrastructure and training of human resources and dedicated staff. And they have to be in hospitals which have ICUs and which can really take care of patients very well. For phase 2 and 3, you need different kinds of capacity. So we're in the process of developing that. And the Department of Biotechnology also recently has launched this Biopharma mission, which is a partnership with the World Bank to try to speed in product development, especially in the area of vaccines for a few identified diseases and biosimilars. So they also have this mandate to strengthen clinical trial capacity. So I think in the next few years we'll see a lot of that happening.
But would that be for the government agencies working in this sort of field, or will it also be open for private companies who are doing research in these fields to use those facilities?
It will be open for private also, because without private we really can't to make new products. I think we need to realize that. So there is no other way except for government and private to work together.
And the initial investment of setting up the phase 1 trial infrastructure would come in from the government, from ICMR's budget?
We're also looking at partnerships.
Okay.
At public-private partnerships to do this.
All right. Coming to ICMR specifically, the focus area for ICMR is quite widespread. But what are the core areas that ICMR is currently focusing on? Which are the 2 or 3 divisions or departments that you're pushing forth, linking it to the current state of healthcare in India?
Our canvas is very wide. As you said, we work on practically everything. We have had a bias historically on infectious diseases, because that was India's major burden. And now we're moving, our funding focus is also shifting to non-communicable diseases, because the burden of disease is more in the non-communicable disease. So for example, the largest survey of diabetes anywhere in the world is the INDAB survey, which has been funded by the ICMR, which has already covered 17 states and is covering the rest very soon, which has given us now the state level prevalence of diabetes hypertension and lipid disorders in every state. So now states have that data, and they can see what kind of a volcano they're sitting on and how they really need to focus on primary health to make sure that you detect and treat hypertension and diabetes and keep people on treatment and control their diabetes and hypertension so that you can prevent future cardiovascular morbidity and deaths. So those kind of studies, large epidemiological studies which really provide data for action, would be something we continue to do in the area of nutrition and in the area of non-communicable diseases, and also in diseases like tuberculosis and malaria, where there is a need to document accurately the numbers.
Data has been the biggest challenge, right, till now?
It is a challenge, because to do a nationwide study in India requires such huge planning and resources that very few national prevalence surveys. India is one of the few countries not to have done a national TB prevalence survey. All our neighboring countries have done it. So now we're launching on it, but you know, it's
high time. We've in tuberculosis particularly, we've moved on to antibiotic resistance and MDR TB. So
malaria also, we're planning a national burden study. Apart from that, I think our major flagship programs are going to be in a few areas which are again linked to our national disease burden. The first is in the area of nutritional disorders. Especially undernutrition, stunting and anemia, which are major causes. Even today, the National Family Health Survey shows us that still 38% of our under 5 children are stunted. 60% of our women in the reproductive age group are anemic.
Still anemic.
Yeah. And wasting rates have increased in in many states. So we are partnering, because this is not something that we can do in isolation. The only way is to bring convergence at the ground level, at the village level, the community level. So I think the ministries, departments of health, women and child development, the Swachh Bharat program, the drinking water and sanitation, as well as agriculture. So ICMR plays an important role in they've already developed a number of varieties of foods which are rich in micronutrients,
fortified
biofortified plants. How do we make farmers, villagers grow those plants for their own consumption? And a lot of it is to do with nutrition education and counseling. So people are not fully aware of what's healthy, what's not, and what do you combine with what. So if you have a plate for lunch or dinner, what are the things that you should not be combining with each other? For example, drinking a cup of tea after a meal actually reduces your iron absorption so much that even if you had a fairly nutritious meal, just that cup of tea will ensure that the iron is not absorbed. So similarly, for calcium, for all the micronutrients, there are locally available foods which are not very costly, which people are not taking because they don't have that.
But has this program been launched on a national level now, or you're still on the pilot stage?
There is a National Nutrition Mission now.
Yeah.
And we are going to work in a few districts to begin with to actually show that how do you do this at the ground level. So we're going to have the collector as the focal point, the coordinator, under whom all these different programs, the government has so many programs, how do we converge them? How do we improve the food that's being given in the Anganwadi centers? How do we improve the midday meal program? And how do we improve the diets people are eating in their own homes? So, and I think educating the school children is going to be important. The next generation must have a good idea about what a balanced diet is. And also we mustn't forget the other extreme. Urban children are becoming obese, especially the upper income groups. They're eating too much processed food, junk food, and too much salt as well. So on the one hand, we still have undernourished population, anemic, but on the other hand, we have a growing burden of obesity and overweight, which is not good, because that's going to lead to all the other non-communicable diseases.
So nutrition becomes your one focus area.
That's one focus area. Another focus area is mental health. Mental health is something we've neglected for too long, and the recent National Mental Health Survey showed a burden of 13% of the population at any time has a mental health disorder.
Okay.
It could be a mild one, like an anxiety disorder, it could be depression, but it could also be severe illnesses. And all these, it's been stigmatized heavily. Nobody wants to say that I'm depressed or I have this or that problem, or whether I have a patient in my family who has schizophrenia or dementia. it's time now to come out of that box, to not only talk about it, but we have only 3,000 psychiatrists for the whole country. And recently I found out that there are 7,000 Indian psychiatrists in the US, but only 3,000 psychiatrists in India. So we cannot depend on psychiatrists to provide mental health care. We need to train people.
So what would be ICMR's role here?
ICMR's role is to do the implementation research. That's the way of demonstrating in a real life setting what works and what doesn't work. So we've put out a call when we're funding several projects where psychiatrists in medical college hospitals will work with grassroots level bodies, either NGOs or work with ASHAs and ANMs to help to train them to provide this, to detect mental health disorders at the community level, to refer, but also to try and manage minor things. And similarly for adolescents is very important. Suicide today is a leading cause of death among 15 to 29-year-olds.
Right.
And this is very disturbing. And it means that we are not paying attention to our children and adolescents' mental health. We're also partnering with theatre and film personalities to see how can we use the media or film
bringing awareness
on mental health and to reduce the stigma, so that people start seeking care.
At least in the last 1 year, we've seen a lot of people talk about their own mental health conditions. So those become your focus areas for ICMR.
And the third area, non-communicable diseases, hypertension control particularly.
Okay.
So we're working with several state governments now on implementing strategies to control hypertension at the population level, because this again is a chronic disease.
Right.
People either don't know that they have high blood pressure because it doesn't cause any symptoms in the beginning, or even if they know, they're not taking it seriously, they're not taking treatment. So it's quite shocking that at the population level only 12% of hypertensives, people with high blood pressure, are under control, and the remaining are at high risk of developing a stroke or a heart attack. So this will bear a lot of dividends in the long run if we invest in, again, like I said, primary prevention and secondary prevention by strengthening the health system right at the sub-center level, at the PHC level.
Root level.
Yes.
Apart from this, you obviously have a lot of other projects which are ongoing. If we talk of the funding patterns for ICMR now, how is the situation? Because we've heard in the last 1 or 2 years that there has been some bit of crunch as far as budgets are concerned for institutes like ICMR or even CSIR. CSIR chief very recently spoke about a financial emergency, so to say. He said we are almost broke. What is the situation right now for ICMR as far as budgets and funding is concerned?
See, what I would say is that for the kind of burden of disease that we have in India and the health problems that we have and the solutions we need to find, our budgets are not sufficient. So we have a lot of ideas and a lot of requirements to do things, but we are constrained, and then sometimes we slow down. We're not able to produce results in time. A lot of the budget that we get goes towards human resources, of course, because salaries keep going up.
Right.
And you have to keep paying, those higher salaries. So health research in India has been, I think, traditionally underfunded and under-recognized as an important contributor to the health status of the population. So I think our perception also is now changing, and people are really beginning to realize that health research is a very important and integral part of achieving any of our health outcomes, whether they are our sustainable development goals or even the national health policy talks about health research as playing an important part.
Ma'am, recently, CSIR particularly 2 years ago was told that, they should go into a self-sustainable model. Is that something that ICMR is also, is that the mandate for ICMR and Department for Health Research as well? Is that how you're supposed to plan your funding and your expenditures as well to make the organization self-sustainable?
No, I would say that ICMR can never function in that pattern. We've not been asked to either. And the reason is that everything we do is for public health. And our focus is the poor of this country. How do we improve the health of the poor of this country? And so we cannot be in that mode where we're trying to generate resources or using our intellectual property to generate resources, whatever intellectual property we develop. And recently our Institute of Virology in Pune has developed, at least 6 new diagnostic tests, all for diseases which are of public health importance.
Right.
And also a number of vaccine candidates for new viral diseases. Now we're not going to try and sell these off and make millions, because we want it to be developed at low cost and to be made available at low cost to the public health system. So whether it's a TB diagnostic or whether it's so our whole mission is oriented towards that, and therefore we cannot become an agency that's
financially self-sustaining
or trying to
or a revenue expenditure sort of a cycle you're saying is not possible.
But I should add that our scientists are always generating funds from outside, because they write research grants and we get grants from funding agencies both abroad and in India. So that will continue, and it should even grow.
But ma'am, if we look at the outlay for the for ICMR, Department of Health Research, we've seen it only go down. The 12th 5-year plan had outlaid 10,029 crore rupees. The actual expenditure, I think, till now has only been over 3,000 crore rupees. Why is there this gap? Has the government indicated paucity of funds for them, or is there any other reason why the funds have not been allocated?
Like I said, this is a long-standing problem. So, but we've seen in the last 2 years that our funds have gone up. So
it has, yes.
Yeah. So this year, in fact, we got about a 25% increase in funding, and last year at the RE stage, where we in the mid-year stage, we actually got a substantial input, and we were able to fund large mission mode projects at that time. So I'm quite optimistic that if we go with these large programs and we have a clear idea of what we're going to fund and how that will impact the health, then I'm sure that our funding is only going to increase.
A recent Parliamentary Standing Committee report last year, I think 2016, spoke about how ICMR was not judicious enough in making expenditures, and it said the institute should be judicious in making expenditures of, and there were a lot of unutilized funds that it spoke about. If you could highlight what were the issues there and what has been done post that Parliamentary Standing Committee report.
Actually, we've never had unutilized funds in the last whatever number of years.
It spoke about some 80 lakh rupees which had come for a program, and of which only 30 lakhs were used. So
overall, when we see our budget, our expenditure has always been over 99%. In fact, we've been dipping into some of our savings and corpus funds to tide over. So maybe in a particular project there were delays in expenditure, but overall, if you look at ICMR, we've had 98-99% expenditures every year for many years.
Okay.
They also talked about outputs. The parliamentary committee had talked about
linking it to outputs.
So that's something we've taken on board. We've taken very seriously. We've had a review of our entire programs, and we've had an external committee come and audit all our institutes and their outputs. And so now we've reoriented our mission. We've come out with a new strategic plan, and this is a 7-year, 15-year vision and a 7-year program and a 3-year objectives with a clear output. So every institute now has been asked to delineate very clearly what their 3-year and 5-year milestones are going to be in different areas. So I think we have reoriented the way our institutes work, but a lot of our funding goes to medical colleges and other academics, universities and so on. A lot of the work done at AIIMS, for example, is funded by the ICMR. So it looks like AIIMS is doing wonderful work, and they are, but most of the research funding is coming from the ICMR. Similarly, you take PGI Chandigarh, you take CMC Vellore, take St. John's, take JIPMER and Pondicherry. These are the big, the centers of national importance. A lot of their research is funded by the ICMR. So the credit, of course, goes to and it should, to the investigators there, the doctors there. Funding flows from here. So that's not sometimes visible to the public. And I've spoken to a lot of very senior biomedical researchers in this country who've told me that if it were not for ICMR funding at the early stages of their career, they wouldn't be where they are today.
Okay.
So I think it's really helped to nurture and
grow the basic research culture here.
Yeah.
Ma'am, particularly on funding, what is the current funding, what is the allocations that ICMR is getting on an annual scale, and what is exactly the requirement that you have right now?
So, to be very open with you, our grant for this year, the allocation for this year is 1,500 crores for the Department of Health Research. Our request was for about 2,500.
Okay.
So, we're hoping that some of this shortfall would actually be met, you know, the mid-year when the budgets are revised. And we're also now looking at raising funds through public-private partnerships and from corporates.
Okay.
So that would also go on, but like I said, our core funding needs to come from government.
What would be the plan in terms of raising money through public-private partnership? Like, what would be the models that you would look at?
So the models we would look at are say partnership could be a 50-50, it could be, you know, technical inputs coming from us and some financial inputs coming from, I'll give you an example. We've entered into a partnership with a company to do malaria elimination in some districts of Madhya Pradesh, and the company has set up a foundation which is putting in substantial resources. The Madhya Pradesh government is ensuring that drugs and diagnostics for malaria are available, and the ICMR Institute in Madhya Pradesh is working with this to ensure that the right technical inputs and the right strategies are formed. So we'll see now at the end of 3 years how successful this is.
Okay.
So similarly, we're talking to a lot of other agencies to see how we can partner with them, and this is a policy that's now being developed, and it'll be taken forward.
You spoke about you had asked for 2,500 crore rupees of funds. What you received, at least as of now, is 1,500, roughly 1,500 crore rupees. Has in the last 1 or 2 years, when there has been paucity of fund being allocated or dispersed to ICMR, research that has suffered, are there institutes, have there been research programs that you had to put on hold?
Yeah, like I said, things do get delayed, because then you wait for the next financial year to start something which you could have started in this year. Grant releases get delayed. Researchers get frustrated, because research is something that is very time sensitive, and world over, people have the same ideas at the same time, so it's also very competitive. And so if you want to be among the leading people and you want to be the first to make and report a discovery, then you have to be very speedy and efficient in the way you function. So delays in funding could cause people to lag behind in their work.
Any number of projects that you would have possibly put on hold for now that you would revisit when you have money?
No, I can't give you a number, because we get thousands of applications, and we fund about 10% of the number of applications that we receive, and this is based entirely on a very transparent reviews process. So I think we are fairly stringent in that. Now, we are not accepting any more applications, because we know that we have X amount of funds that we'll be able to disperse, and there's no point making researchers go on submitting proposals which are ultimately not going to be funded. So we're opening up our online system for a few weeks, receiving a certain number of proposals, making sure that we review and approve those, and then opening it up again. So the more resources we get, the more we'll be able to fund, and I think that will encourage more people to come into research, because young people need to get some incentive, some rewards. So if they find that their projects are not getting funded or there's no scope, they'll be discouraged.
Right.
So if we want to encourage more young biomedical researchers, we also have to ensure that the funding is
in place for you to fund. So on an average, till like maybe 2 years ago, what were the number of entries that you used to take for these grants, and what would be it now when you are a little cautious in terms of accepting applications?
Even though we're cautious, I think the numbers have grown so much that every year our extramural funding has actually been increasing.
Okay.
So even though we're saying that our budgets are constrained, 10 years ago I think we were spending something like 40-50 crores on extramural, that is funding research in medical colleges, universities and academia. And for the last few years we've been funding close to 200 crores. Last year was the highest, about 220 crores of extramural funding we were able to disperse. So it's been showing an upward graph.
Trajectory,
yes.
Of the 1,500 crore rupees, ma'am, how much goes in for basic research? Is this 200 crores that you're talking about, or it's more? Because there'll be basic research for ICMR individually as well. So
I think, see, the basic science quite often is funded by Department of Science and Technology and Department of Biotechnology. We also fund basic science, no doubt. So probably I would say around 10 to 15% probably goes into the basic science, and the rest would be going into the translational, clinical, operational and epidemiological kind of research.
If we talk, of the focus areas and the spending that you're doing, what sort of focus and funding is being put on vaccine development, particularly one on dengue and one on malaria, and Japanese encephalitis, because that's the latest burden, and we've seen a very severe impact of that in post-Gorakhpur. What would be the spending and focus on that?
So Japanese encephalitis, we had actually developed a vaccine that was then given to a company, and it's in the market now. So that
Bharat Biotech.
Bharat Biotech, yes, was developed with ICMR collaboration. For malaria, we are not funding the vaccine trial. That's been, the vaccine candidate that was developed at ICGV in Delhi is now in phase 1 trial, and we're involved in the whole process, but we're not funding that. And what we've taken a big lead on now is the tuberculosis. And we have a mission mode program on TB. We call it the India TB Research Consortium, where we brought together a lot of the government and non-governmental partners. And we want to fund mission mode projects like on diagnostics, on new drug combinations, and on new vaccines for TB. So there we're planning actually huge TB vaccine trial, which will be probably one of the largest trials to be undertaken, which will compare 3 different vaccine candidates for TB.
Okay.
And 2 of those candidates are going to be Indian made, and one is one that's been developed by an American.
And which are the states where this pilot would be?
No, this will be a multi-centric trial. We're still finalizing the sites, but I think there would be at least 8 to 10 sites in the country that would undertake this trial. It will take another year because it's going through the regulatory process now.
Okay. Ma'am, and as far as, when you talk of tuberculosis, we do talk of drug resistance. AMR is the biggest burden that we are seeing now. WHO has called for work that has to be done on AMR. You are on the UN board as well. What is the progress that you see in India as far as, dealing with AMR is concerned? We have a policy and an action plan. But that action plan doesn't really specify what would be the steps taken. So where is India as far as dealing with AMR is concerned?
I think in the last year I've seen a lot of movement on this in India. And as you say, the action plan was launched, and more recently now they've really started coming out with the operational plan as to what exactly is it going to look like. And very recently there was a consultation with states, and every state has been asked to develop an action plan. Now we are working with several partners here on very practical things, and that is mainly at the hospital level. We are working with about a group of 25 hospitals now on first of all, studying their rate of infections that they have, especially in their ICUs and so on, and to document that baseline. Then bring in interventions, for antimicrobial stewardship, we call it. So you basically have an antibiotic policy, you have an infection control committee, you have people who regulate the way the antibiotics are being used in that hospital, and you have regular meetings and so on, and then you start looking at your data, and you can look at data from different departments. You can say, okay, this department implemented these policies, and look what's happened to their rates of infection, rates of antibiotic resistance. So over time, I think hospitals start looking at this data. The Kayakalp program of the ministry, which gives prizes to hospitals includes infection control as one of the points on which they get marks. And then of course we're doing surveillance as well. So we've set up a network of 20 microbiology labs in the country, and we're looking at 6 groups of priority pathogens, including fungus, incling gram-negative bacteria, Acinetobacter, which causes neonatal sepsis, and we're looking at they're funding research on studying transmission. How are these drug-resistant bacteria spreading inside the hospital, and then also trends over time. And these kind of data are also helping to make the antibiotic guidelines for use in India. Because if you know that a particular drug, bacteria 90% chance of being resistant to that drug, then there's no point
avoid
using
it.
that drug, you avoid it, go to others. And very recently we've now entered into partnership with the veterinarians and with the FAO, because a lot of antibiotic is used in animals, poultry and fish farming. And unless we tackle that, so we've actually come to some agreement on which are the antibiotics which should be completely out of veterinary use, because right now they're all common antibiotics.
Has that list already been prepared?
So that list has been prepared, it's been discussed. Now we'll have to take a final view on that, and then the ban would have to come into force.
Which would be some of the common antibiotics, ma'am, according to you, which should not be used in veterinary?
Colistin is one antibiotic, which I think globally there's a consensus, because colistin is a drug that's used to treat very resistant organisms which cause very bad infections in humans. And that's kind of the last drug we have. And so if you use that a lot in animals, you might be actually fueling that drug resistance. So like that we have one or two others which we thought, but we need a lot of cooperation now from the veterinarians and the large farms, the poultry farms, the cattle farms and the fish farms. To ensure that, and a lot of the farmers are using them, don't even know that there are antibiotics in the growth promoters and in the powders that they are using.
Right.
They're just told that these are growth promoters and your animals will do well. So a lot of it is
awareness as well, which is missing.
Awareness. And also people buying, over-the-counter antibiotics. The Red Line campaign that the government started last year, I think we need to look at its impact, because all drugs which have a red line on the cover, essentially people should see that red line and say, oh, this is not a drug I should be having without a doctor's prescription.
Right.
And then of course the doctor's prescribing practices also.
I was just about to ask you that, because we recently did a show called Bad Medicine where we looked at a detailed look at the quackery in India, Jhola Chhap doctors and their prescribing patterns, and then eventual and it is just way off the mark, and it is not only the quacks, it's also even the MBBS doctors, and their prescribing patterns are like at once they would write some 8 medicines, 8 pills on a sheet of prescription, half of which possibly you don't need. So how would you deal with this part? It's easy to put in a ban on certain things when it comes to industrial use or using it. How do we manage the medical fraternity? Is there some work that ICMR is doing with the medical fraternity on AMR?
We're working, like I said, mostly with hospitals, and now we want to come down and work so we work with tertiary hospitals. Now we will try to come down and work with secondary care. But the problem is a large number of practitioners in the country, in the formal and informal sector, like you said, everything from quacks, to MBBS doctors, and in remote areas and all that, they are the first point of access. So educating them or bringing them online is a huge task. Some states have attempted to do that, working with the quacks to try and improve their awareness, make them say, okay, at least don't use these drugs, stick to these and so on. So this is a task we have to create awareness in the population as a whole. But one thing we can do is to strengthen the regulatory system. So we have different classes of drugs which are allowed to be dispensed with or without prescriptions.
Right.
So we have the Schedule H and then the Schedule X and so on. So if we really are very strict on implementing that, and if our drug inspectors take action on shops and pharmacies which are selling these outside the purview of the schedule in which they've been put, because a lot of the antibiotics now have been put in the Schedule H plus, which means that a record has to be maintained in the pharmacy with a prescription of which doctor has prescribed it. And if they're not doing that, then they need to be, some punitive action needs to be taken. So I think we need to really tighten our drug regulatory system at the state level, so that the inspectors become much more effective, and we also don't reduce this.
And we also don't have the drug prescribing mandate that most countries have as to which drugs can be the first line of treatment in a certain infection or in a disease.
So those, I mean, we've worked on. The ICMR as well as the National Center for Disease Control, NCDC, have come out with certain guidelines on antibiotic prescribing.
Okay.
But the common ones for which antibiotics are given are respiratory infections.
Yes.
And we know that 90% of those are viral.
Yeah.
And antibiotics do absolutely nothing. And then diarrhea, where again a lot of diarrhea in children is viral, and you don't need to use antibiotics.
So you spoke about obviously dealing with the doctors about poultry and animal farms where the list of banned antibiotics could possibly come out in some time. How is ICMR working to deal with the industrial pollutants that, you know, from the pharmaceutical side? Because globally, UN as well as WHO have listed that also as one of the prime reasons for antibiotic resistance, because that flows in the water that we consume and which is used for agriculture. Has there been any talk, any discussion, and any plan to deal on that? And is that a burden in India also compared to globally?
There's anecdotal data that it is a burden, that it is a problem. That effluence from factories.
But it's only anecdotal. We don't have it.
ICMR as such has not worked in this area, though we are very much aware that we think it's a priority. But we haven't done any primary research yet.
Okay. Taking the AMR discussion forward, one is your antibiotics getting weaker and bacteria getting resistance. We also need to develop newer antibiotics. As far as basic research on antibiotics is concerned, what is the plan? What is ICMR and Department of Health Research working on right now? Do we have some leads that we are following and some research in that area?
So this we can only do by stimulating and funding and supporting research in labs across the country. And I must say that I'm encouraged to see a large number of startups now, particularly, who are working on new drug candidates. So I feel that in the next 5 years, we will have. And these are startups that are actually working on diseases which are relevant for us, which are a problem for us, you know, including some of the neglected tropical diseases, including diseases like tuberculosis, and also bacterial infections which cause deaths in the ICUs and so on. So I see a very encouraging trend, and I think all the science agencies are funding more and will need to fund more in the coming years to see these new drugs coming up.
To fund these startups, what would be your funding requirement? As in, would it be beyond the 2,500 crore rupees that you had asked for, or is the 2,500 crore rupees include what you would want to fund these startups?
It would be definitely, you know, we would be able to fund something with 2,500, but overall, I think we are looking at an envelope of something like at least 5,000 crores for health research funding. So if we can get there over the next few years, I think that will be really good, because then we can put substantial investment into these companies, because they are also looking around here and there for funds. And there are a few opportunities around, of course. But I think, you know, to quickly take something into a clinical trial, for example, if you had that resource available, say a dedicated pool of funds for clinical trials for new drugs or new vaccines, then we'll be able to move very fast. So I think that's the kind of thing we need to do, and hopefully this will happen over the next couple of years.
Ma'am, do you think as a country, as a health policy, and as government, India has been a little slack as far as disease management is concerned? You know, we always wake up when there has been a tragedy. When there is a Gorakhpur, we wake up to what was done as far as Japanese encephalitis is concerned, or any other disease, any other examples. Do you think there has the government or the policy per se, and the way we have worked on disease management, we've slacked somewhere?
Well, first of all, I will say that we've made huge advances, and we need to remember that, because of course, yes, the tragedies, you know, always make the front page, and you know, we need to pay attention to them. But if you look at where we were, say 20 years ago, where we are today in terms of maternal or infant mortality, or the fact that we've actually managed to eliminate a disease like neonatal tetanus, which was a huge problem when I was doing my MD. We used to see so many babies coming in, and it was a pathetic sight. They would die of neonatal tetanus. But because of the simple intervention of a vaccine, we're able to now eliminate tetanus. We've eliminated polio. So we've had major successes, I would say, in the health area. And if you look at, we'll be coming out with a report in November where we're looking at state level disease burden. And you can see several of the states, particularly in the southern part of the country, really have parameters, health parameters, which are similar to many European countries, Western countries. But to come back to your question, yes, there are parts of our country where the health system is weak, where we have not invested enough basically in primary health care. And we have to focus. We have to focus on those areas, and I think that in the coming years, the National Health Policy is really looking at strengthening primary health care, at delivering good care, focusing on preventive and promotive health, at not only at the primary health center level, but one step below, which is a sub-center level, which caters to about 5,000 population. And these are going to be called health and wellness centers.
Right.
To completely change the way, so people should come there to have checkups, see if you have diabetes or hypertension, you get screened, you get started on treatment. There could be, there'll be a Ayush practitioner there who's perhaps teaching yoga as well, or using some of the Ayurvedic medicines to maintain good health, focus on good nutrition and lifestyle. So I think the whole paradigm from curative, the perspective is now changed to preventive, and I think if we put more focus there, then we can not only reduce the out-of-pocket expenditure that people are facing today, but eventually lead to a healthier population.
Institutes like ICMR particularly have worked on disease management programs with states in endemic regions, but is it not being implemented in the way, or the study has not been used effectively to help those regions? What has happened then?
You're right. I think
because for Japanese encephalitis, I remember reading a couple of reports that were done in the last 5-10 years, where ICMR has done enough bit of work as far as mapping out the plan, mapping out the issue is concerned. So then, where do we fall short? We have basic research, we have good doctors, we have a good system in place, but the disease burdens still are so high.
Yes. So our basic mandate is research, and one form of research is called implementation research, where you work with state governments to demonstrate something.
The practical aspect.
A practical aspect, a strategy, something on the ground which works. And then of course scaling up, it depends on the state government, how they do it. Sometimes you demonstrate, particular area, like in Gorakhpur we showed that scrub typhus is a major cause of acute encephalitis syndrome, because after the Japanese encephalitis vaccine was introduced, the JE came down. And scrub typhus today is a major cause, and other infections like dengue are also causing this AES syndrome. So you need to have diagnostics there in place. But I think we can also do better at evidence to policy translation. So recently we've set up a whole system of being able to translate some of our research into policy briefs, which can then go to the policy makers in a way that's easily understandable and easily translatable into policy. So perhaps in the past there has been some kind of a gap or a distance between the research community and the practice community. So we need to bridge that gap. So we need to sit together, because they need to tell us these are our pressing problems on the ground. We're not able to achieve this. We don't know why. Can you help do research to tell us what's happening? Or this is a new strategy we would like to try, but we don't know if it will be successful. Can you do a comparison study to tell us? And so on. And from our side, I think whatever research we are doing, we should be able to quickly communicate those results to the policymakers and say, look, this is what we found, like scrub typhus, for example. This is the major cause. This is how it can be
But
prevented.
when you approach the government with this type of a finding, how is it being received by the government? As in, especially after Gorakhpur, has there been some sort of a emergency situation where the government has stepped up as far as how they deal with this crisis is concerned, or they're going slow still?
No, it's always received very well. My experience has been that when you go to either state government or central government ministry, health with some new research findings or with something that could impact policy, it's always received positively, and then there's a dialogue and discussion on how can we help to implement this better or bigger. The point is that we also may not be there in every situation and every emergency. So sometimes you come in after the event and then help to sort out what had happened. But I think more and more now we're learning and working closely together in the area of malaria. For example, now we're looking at malaria elimination by 2027.
Right.
Research would play an important role. Tuberculosis, we work very closely with the TB program. In HIV, we've always worked, the researchers and the programmers have worked very closely together. And now in maternal and child health as well. In the NCD area, we're really collaborating now because there are lots of unanswered questions. How do you manage a lifelong disease like hypertension? Our health system has not been used to doing that. So this will be something new. We are used to treating something for a week or 15 days and then we are done.
Done with it.
Or you're managing a mother and a child for a limited period of time. But here's a disease chronic. You have to manage that person lifelong. So these are things we will be working together.
So the government is receiving your ideas with an open mind. But in turn, in terms of funding, has there been like enough inputs?
Yes. So very often the Ministry of Health or the National Health Mission would actually fund research projects which are directly relevant for them. A recent example is the IMNCI program, the Integrated Maternal, Neonatal and Child Health Intervention Program, which the government of course is part of an NHM flagship program. They funded ICMR to do an impact evaluation across 8 states to see how that program has worked, where are the challenges, where are the gaps, so that they could actually improve. So these are very good partnerships. We have a deworming program now that the government has scaled up. So we want to work in a few areas where we want to implement a different strategy of deworming. Deworm the entire population instead of deworming only the school children. To see if that is going to be a better option to get rid of worms from that environment.
Okay, ma'am, just as a last question, I'll wrap up. When we talk of ICMR, its focus, you said you've reoriented the way ICMR was working in terms of 7-year plans, 5-year, 3-year plans. What is it where you're keeping as your short-term goal for 3 years and 5 years? Briefly, if you could, help us understand what is it that ICMR is focusing right now in terms of achieving in the next 3 years. And we spoke about the need for more funds. We spoke about there has been a paucity of funds. In the last 1 or 2 years, have you had to, like, for every program, go and, with the government talk, convince them to spend more funding here? How do you see this going forward?
So I think that, as you have some successes and you show some successes, then it will be easier also to raise more funds. So I think we have to look at it in that perspective. And I think working with multiple partners also brings a lot of strength. So like you asked me, in the next few years, what are we trying to show? I think one is, if we can, we are doing several large burden studies, epidemiological burden studies, diabetes. We're doing a national dengue prevalence study. We're going to start the TB prevalence survey and so on, malaria burden study. So we'll be able to provide data to the government on that. Second area is in the area of nutrition. In the next 3 years, we'd like to demonstrate on the ground using convergence mechanisms and ensuring that all the targeted programs actually are delivered appropriately, that we can have an impact on malnutrition on the ground. Similarly, I mentioned hypertension. We'd like to show within the next couple of years in about 50 districts in the country that we have now a method of not only screening and detecting hypertension, but a way to manage chronic disease on the ground. And then in the area of diagnostics, we are hoping that we'll have at least a couple of new point-of-care diagnostics, one for tuberculosis, but also we're looking at chikungunya and some of the other viral infections in which we need more point-of-care tests. So these are some of our early deliverables that we're looking at. Others, of course, would be, there are too many for me to list. All of them. But in the area of Kala-Azar, for example, we've worked in close partnership with the governments of Bihar, mainly Bihar, but also Jharkhand and West Bengal, to show how you can eliminate Kala-Azar from a district. And once that model was demonstrated, then it becomes very easy for the government to just scale that up. So basically to show what are the elements that you need to eliminate a disease from a particular district. We're working on filariasis as well, so hopefully that's also going to
because that's also part of the national health policy for on eradication,
and it's on one of the elimination
lists.
So hopefully that we should be able to make a policy change next year based on the research that we've done in one district in Karnataka.
In your TB program, is the entire bedaquiline, controlled release program that they had gone through, is that also part of it, and how has that progressed?
So that bedaquiline compassionate use or expanded use program is not part of an ICMR research study. It's through the national program, through the TB control program. But what we are going to launch now is a clinical trial where we will combine bedaquiline and delaminid, these two new drugs for TB, to try to shorten the treatment of XDR-TB. So that would be in a research mode.
So for that you would be doing clinical trials?
Yes, clinical trials. Yes.
Okay. There is a Japanese company that has also...
They manufacture delaminid, which is the other new drug for TB.
Right.
So it would be, we would partner with both Otsuka and Johnson & Johnson, who makes bedaquiline, to do that trial. We've been involved with the RNTCP in the scale-up of bedaquiline at for these 600 initial patients, because these patients have been kept under very close monitoring for side effects, and so we've been involved in that whole process of doing that. But essentially, it's the ministry that scaled up bedaquiline.
And when is that TB trial, bedaquiline as well as delaminid?
It will start within the next 6 months or so. So it's in the final stages now of protocol development.
Okay, and how large would that study be?
That's going to be, I think, something like 300 to 350 patients with XDR-TB, who would be given a combination of these two drugs with two other drugs. And it would be a game changer, because if we're able to shorten the treatment to 6 months, from currently it's 24 to 30 months, it would be a big thing for patients.
And this would be entirely led by ICMR?
ICMR and the consortium of partners that we've created.
So Janssen India, Otsuka,
the Ministry of Health, DBT, some of the other science ministries, as well as we have partners like USAID who are willing to co-fund.
You also receive some funding from international grants, like how PHFI has been funded through FCRA, the foreign funding.
Our scientists get international grants all the time from NIH, from the Wellcome Trust, from other funding bodies. The TB program actually was kick-started with a grant from the Tata Trusts. So they gave us the initial grant to start all these TB trials.
But there has been no issue as far as receiving those funds is concerned, because some, like at least for PHFI, there has been a lot of concerns raised on international funding, foreign funding, and...
No, we've had no problem, and being a government-funded body, we have an exemption from the...
I just heard the word NIH, and I also heard you earlier speak about NIH when you were talking to a couple of people, and you said you're looking to scale up ICMR to the level of NIH. I would, in fact, want to end my conversation here. What is your plan when you say you want to scale up ICMR or make it as big as NIH, because it's like the world highest level. So
leading funder of biomedical research in the world.
So what does ICMR want to do to be there, and what would be your targets be?
So actually the things that I spoke about, increasing the funding for extramural support, funding early discovery science, which is risky, which industry will never support, so that we can actually start developing more drugs and diagnostics, funding epidemiological studies across the country so that we have a good idea of disease burden, and then being able to support a lot of young investigators across the country so that India starts growing and generating many more researchers in the field of biomedical and health research. So I think we have to have that kind of outlook and a vision where our medical colleges become the hubs and centers for research excellence in the country. Today they are good teaching hospitals, they provide patient care, but only a handful of them are doing high quality research. So I'd like to see in the next 10 years at least 50 of our medical colleges producing, world class research.
All right, ma'am, on that note, thank you so much for your time, and we wish you luck with all your endeavors.
Thank you very much.